Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are live for a special Saturday edition. Sorry, we're a little bit late. We're haggard and tired as we carried out a 41-mile kayak ride yesterday with the company to raise money for charity, which was hugely successful. If you want the link to sponsor, we're still taking sponsors, and we did obviously achieve that. But without further ado, those of you that are listening, it's the 31st of August, and we decided to do a special on a project that has been requested to be done by multiple of our followers and listeners, which is our site in Long Hanborough, which is right next to Blenheim Palace. And it's a quirky old doctor's surgery. And in today's deep dive, we'll be going through the full sort of 360 process of a project. That's finding it, funding it, design and planning, delivery, and then what we're doing with the project to hold the scheme. So stay tuned. We've got top tips on how you can slice and dice a project to make them successful, and why this one is hopefully going to be a successful project for us. Anything else to add, Ben?
No, nothing other than, like Jack said in the intro, we are very achy today. For those listening in on the podcast, you won't see what's up on screen, but the map shows our kayak trip from Abingdon all the way down through Henley-on-Thames. Like Jack said, 65 kilometres, about 41 miles. It took us 11 hours in the end. We set off at 6 o'clock in the morning for this beautiful picture in the middle here, where the river looked like a sheet of glass. It was a beautiful day throughout, and we ended up getting in at about 5 o'clock to the pub. A well-deserved pint for everyone and some bites to eat. But we've smashed our target. So we targeted £2,000, and we are currently on £3,008. So thank you very, very much for those that have already donated. If you haven't yet, it's for the charity Mind in aid of mental health awareness. So yeah, do give generously. If you're listening to this, hopefully we'll put the link to the Just Giving page down in the description below. But very good day all round, aching significantly today. But let's jump into this deep dive of Long Hanborough, which, as Jack said, is a doctor surgery conversion. This is a classic commercial conversion, Class E to use Class C3, which is the sort of prior approval permitted development, which I'm going to be getting into in detail a bit later. We're going to be talking about the purchasing, how we funded the full structure. We're looking at the development appraisal, how we've taken it through various different phases of planning. I'm going to be boggling a few people's minds with some detailed design information and things you need to be thinking about when you're doing commercial conversions like this, which are fundamental to making it a success with building regulation, your warranty provider. And then Jack's going to be talking about some of the long-term strategy. So, why have we bought this? What's the goal of this one? And some projects we sell, some projects we hold, and Jack's going to be talking through what we're doing with this one. Cool. Over to you, Jack.
Over to the purchase. So at XP, we have a very clear sort of finite strategy of what we will acquire. And this one is actually breaking that rule of thumb that we set ourselves. This is going against our own mantra of what we will require. And we get to that mantra by understanding the cost of the business, understanding our capabilities, and our sort of ability to deliver what size of schemes. And for that reason, we only tend to like to deliver schemes that are over £2 million in gross development value. That's between 2 and 12 is our sweet spot. And the reason we do that is because you technically do similar amount or the same amount of work and resource on a project that might be 1 million gross development as 5 million gross development value. So that's been a distinct decision that we've made as a business, and this one falls under that category. It's quite a small project, but we'll lead on to why we have ended up buying this. So it was listed on the open market by a very well-known agent in Oxfordshire for £400,000. This site is actually owned by a big development outfit just outside of Oxfordshire, and for the same reasons, this was too small for them to get their hands dirty. I believe that they are this developer are currently building a 100-house development site just down the road from this site. So you can sort of see a small 3,000 square foot doctor's surgery might be a little bit small for them. A lot of buyers were looking at this to demolish what I and some people might call an ugly sort of commercial asset that hasn't been really thought through from a design perspective for people passers by. It's a doctor's surgery. It serves a purpose. It's a community asset, And for that reason, it's probably been led more down the route of practicality, so accessibility, usability, waiting rooms, surgery rooms, more so than design aspect. And for that reason, it is quite ugly. All of the footprint is pretty much building or tarmac and parking, so it's very efficient. And every developer that was looking at this site was thinking, knock it down, rebuild, knock it down, rebuild. The problem you have with that is you're knocking down infrastructure that was already, someone spent some money on building that, and you're then starting from scratch in an area where it's only topping out of 400 square foot. We were looking at repurposing the existing building from a rental perspective. Therefore, we could afford to pay potentially a little bit more than other bidders. So our bid was 350. We managed to get that over the line, which means we bought that building at £114 per square feet. If you then had to demolish that, you've got land for £114 per square foot for something that was there. So as a development, it was really difficult to make this really stack. And I'll share the numbers on that shortly. And we're hoping to have exit values of about £400 per square foot. There's not really too much complexity around this. It was on the open market. I feel that we just came up with a better solution to repurpose rather than demolish. Therefore, the cost of demolish and new build against repurpose completely brings up our land value to a greater figure than a developer looking to create a fresh start for this site.
Nice.
From a funding perspective, so offer was accepted. I think that there was an element of our reputation in the area and our relationship with the existing agent that enabled us to nudge this one over the line. It's actually the same estate agent that's helping us sell our site in Tame, so they know we're serious players. But we wanted to fund this scheme. We had we'll sort of come on to like the plan and the exit shortly, but we knew from day dot this would be a hold strategy, and that's one of the reasons it is below our gross development value threshold. And being a hold strategy for XP and keeping this cash flowing asset within our portfolio, the most straightforward way to raise capital for this is a loan investment from a private investor on a fixed rate coupon. Therefore, when we finish the project and refinance, it's cleaner because we technically buy their investment out. So there's no equity exchange. So we still own 100% of the project. And also they know what they're getting. We know what we're left with as an asset. We do often do equity investment loans. So the loan comes in, but they own a share of the asset. That's a little bit more complicated when you're holding sites. We do it. We do hold sites with investors. But we like to sort of build that relationship with them over prerequisite projects and ensure that they know how we work, we know how they work. We have a longer term goal strategy with them of holding assets for income. But in this particular scenario, it's a lot cleaner to go right loan investment in for the acquisition. When we refinance, we'll pay down all the investment and the interest, and then we own 100% of the site and they've got their return on capital. So we brought in a loan investor on that basis on a second charge. And the first charge was taken up by a development lending bank, one of the challenger banks out there, quite a common bank, and a very similar structure. So we managed to get the permitted development rights approved before we completed on the site. But before we did that, we actually got something called dual terms. So we got a bridging facility and a development facility. The bridging facility was to buy the building if the planning wasn't approved by the time that we need to complete. And the development facility was in place so that if we then did get prior approval planning application before we needed to complete, we could quickly move on to the development facility and not take the bridging facility out. We also negotiated that the development facility could be transitioned to once we've got onto the bridging facility and not pay the additional fees. But fortunately, the prior approval 56-day notice was served and we managed to get the prior approval approved, which when come January this year, we bought the site with the development facility, which had the facility to actually develop the site. We'll be sharing the numbers next. It's looked a little bit overwhelming, but believe it or not, even on the really, really small deals, we do go to quite a fine-tooth comb to understand the costs of finance. And I really wanted to share this because this applies to any project. And actually, the smaller deals, it's actually more important to do this type of analysis with. I'll give you sort of an example of another project we're doing this on. to make this useful. So what is the cost of finance? So you're probably thinking to yourself, when you get a sheet of terms from a development lender, the cost of finance is the percentage of the money that they charge. And actually that is really, really inaccurate from a borrower's perspective, because that cost of finance comes with loads of other fees around that you need to be factoring into your spreadsheets, into your in and out costs, into your fees that are surrounding that lender. So I found with small projects, you're sometimes more cost effective to go with a bank that has smaller fees around the gig, but might even have a higher cost of finance. Ben, if you want to tap next, there's a few bullet points on this.
Mm-hmm.
So to start off, there's a few more below, Ben. So to start off, we're looking at the leverage. So you've got to think about, is the leverage on the position actually the best thing to be doing? So I've mentioned that we've got a second charge lender that's on a percentage, and you've got to think about how high you want to gear the project. The fees, the monitoring surveyor, valuer, the bank's legal costs, all of these costs. I found some boutique small bank lenders that are happy to do these loans up to £1 million can actually be way more aggressive on their consultant fees around their fees. So for an example, a bank we've worked with a lot, their valuation cost is normally £700 and the monitoring surveyor cost is £300. If you compare that to a bigger lender, and you're normally paying £3,000 for a valuation on a site like this and £1,000 per visit for a monitoring surveyor, those fees costs can completely outweigh the actual cost of blended cost of capital. Then talking about sliding scale, when you're borrowing 100% of the finance costs, and part of that is what I would call mezzanine or second charge lending, and some of it is bank lending, there's a sliding scale so that you have enough leverage to bring down the cost of capital, but obviously not too much, because then you'll probably have certain issues, maybe valuation risk. So valuation risk is if you're going to gear it really high and you've agreed to borrow 200 off the investor, for an example, and the valuation comes back less 50k, so the leverage comes down, you've then got to go back to the investor to borrow more. So make sure that sliding scale works. And I actually had a conversation with UTB this week, and he said our leverage will be at X, and I said, well, you're not going to be competitive then, because my mezzanine finance costs is then greater because it's a more of amount that I need to borrow on top of you. And he couldn't get his head around it. He thought his cost was his cost. He was probably a market leading rate, which they are. That UTB are quite cheap. But what he didn't understand is, for me, in the cost of capital above, is if his leverage came up at 10% for his cost of capital, it reduces the amount of the sort of second charge loan. So a sliding scale is something that needs to be considered. And then the cash buffer on top of that. So for this particular project, we wanted a development facility with obviously fairly lean in and out costs, because we were going direct to the lenders. Obviously a fairly low cost of capital. We wanted low fee costs because it's not a massive project. Smaller projects, you need to be more pernickety on the admin fee, the monitoring surveying fee, the legal fee, the valuation fee, the revaluation fee, the exit legal fees. Make sure you encapsulate those costs and get those agreed up front. And then at the very bottom of that, you can then put in the cost for the loan from the investor, and then do a cost of capital across the bottom. Because if your bank's giving you more money at 10%, it's going to be cheaper for the money you're borrowing on top of that in the second charge position. There's some things to consider. If you want this spreadsheet, we're happy to send it to you. So comment funding cost of finance funding spreadsheet, and we can send that over to you. But it's really important to go through to this detail on small and large deals. The large deal was really important for us to work out that sliding scale for the second charge and first charge position. On the smaller deals, it's really the costs around getting that facility in and out.
Nice.
Development appraisal, I didn't want to share too much so on this, because this, in our opinion, isn't necessarily a development, and we'll come on to that on the next slide. But the way that we see this project, to give you hopefully give you a summary that will then lead on to Ben's sort of design side of things and planning and what we've been working on. I've talked about us not wanting to flatten the scheme and build a new build block of flats. We wanted to repurpose this building to cluster flats to have a really high cash flow position on the side. So fairly low cost of capital, cost of building going in at £114 per square foot. Keep the conversion and construction costs as low as but as effective as possible to create the cluster flats, to create the bedrooms that are going to be revenuing, and then obviously refinance, recoup what capital we can out of the deal, and push the cash flow throughout the course from there. So if we actually look, so this is for the first original application that we had in place before we built the site was 4 apartments and 14 bedrooms. Is that correct, Ben?
12, I think, yeah.
Sorry, 12 bedrooms. And this second application is for 5 apartments, which improves the bricks and mortar valuation, but it's 14 bedrooms. So the cash flow position is greater and the bricks and mortar valuation is greater also. So this is based on the 5 flats and 14 units. Obviously, the 14 units is kind of insignificant at this moment in time because we're just valuing 5 flats as 5 flats, bricks and mortar valuation. Put purchase at 350. Our development cost should come in just over £400,000. Cost of finance just under £70,000. A cost of sales, which we won't actually encounter because we're planning to hold the site, but it's really important you put the cost of sales in there, even if you're planning to hold, just so that you know that if you need to get out, you can. Situations need to get out, investor situation changes, business changes. We have a site that needs to be cash flowed because we've hit a problem and we need to exit this site and use the cash flow for the other site. You never know, but it's good to protect the downside. This produces £188,000 profit selling the big lumpy flats as they are on the open market, which is just under 17% return on GDV after finance costs and 20.4% return on cost after finance costs. We as a business don't necessarily get too honed in on the percentage on GDV and percentage on costs. We care more about the stress testing model, which is running the project through an analysis where the gross development value would decrease by 10 or 15%, depending on the risk of the profile. The build cost would increase by 15%, which is on top of a 10% contingency. We already factor in for the lender that, so that's technically a 25% increase. And the project would to overrun 6 months longer than we had anticipated. You can see on the right-hand side in the green there, if all 3 of those eventualities happen, we still make a £15,000 profit. It's not great, but it's protecting the downside. And we do this on all of our projects. Our metric that we follow is as long as that stress testing model is hit, we will consider going below 20% on GDV, because 20% on GDV is an easy metric for a bank underwriter to use, but that shouldn't necessarily be the guide for your business. You need to understand your business a little bit more intimately, in our opinion. We recommended that our spreadsheet was looking to raise about £290,000 for investment. If we were doing a 50-50 JV, this next box shows on the left-hand side there what we could potentially pay as an annualized rate of return if it was a 50-50 JV on the anticipated profits. And then the very bottom there, we share the XP return, which is really important for developments, not like this one that we hold, but for other ones. We target 200,000 net after splitting the deal with our investor per annum. We make sure that we annualize all of our deals, because your annual costs to run your business are not relative to the project that it takes 2 years. You need to make sure that you're working at an annualized profit on that development.
Nice.
Also, that might be useful for you guys. We've also put a nice little, I think it's a pie chart, 3D pie chart there. We like looking at percentages because you can kind of get a flavor when you're bidding on new sites, whether the purchase price percentage or development percentage sounds high or indifferent, and that's quite important.
Yeah, your purchase price is percentage is likely to be higher with a conversion like this than it is for a new build, when because your build costs on a new build scheme are way greater than the build costs on your conversion. So yes, it's useful to have sort of basic metrics of that. One thing, Jack, that I just wanted to touch on or sort of ask, because we've got in here, cost of finance estimate 67 grand, and in these sort of breakdowns, the figures are more like 100 grand, maybe slightly less than that. Now the difference in those, I assume, and is worthwhile people understanding, is that you don't pay interest payments on money you haven't drawn down. So during the development process, once you do a drawdown, let's say you take 50 grand a month from the bank at the start of the project, you've got 400 grand's worth of drawdown facility available to you, but that's not accruing interest. As soon as you then start drawing that down, say 50 grand a month, you start paying interest on that 50 grand. Next month, you're now paying interest on the first 50 grand and the second lot of 50 grand. Third month, you're paying 150 grand in the total, because you've drawn 50 grand this month, 50 grand the month before, 50 grand the month before that. So actually your interest blended interest rate across the development phase is less than what the sort of total interest would be if you just totaled up the full amount over the period. So that is something to be, where, or just understand basically. You can run analysis at the start of the project, but unless you do what's called like an S-curve sort of calculation of the reducing debt as the project progresses, or the increasing debt as the project progresses, you're not going to get a true sort of true finance figure.
Yeah, completely that. So it is known as the S-curve, and like Ben said, you don't borrow the funds all at the beginning, and also you sell units, so you reduce your finance costs as you go out through the exit. So the whole reason we've gone completely against our own motto in our business and are doing a deal that is too small for us to deliver and roll up our sleeves and use resources is for this exact reason on the screen. You need to pay close attention to this. So I've got a site in front of you which is called St Helens Mill in Abingdon-on-Thames. It won 2 awards because it's huge, profitable development that we carried out back in sort of 2021 to early 2023. So we bought this block of 14 flats. We spent £450,000 renovating them almost one by one until we finished the site, refinanced them. We took low rent, poor quality asset, which was a gorgeous asset in a great location, to high quality, high cash flow, high rents in the same area. We took the rents from £80,000 to £190,000. We took the asset value from £1.5 million to £3.45 million. It's a huge amount of profit, and we generated £1.2 million of profit, which we decided to leave in the project because we refinanced it. Quite a big project. It took 24 months. The net income, because we decided to keep this project, is £29,000. You heard that right. A £3.5 million asset generating £29,000 net. And that is because it's a big lumpy asset of ASTs. They're not yielding as strong as they would if they were HMO or another business model. The ROI on this project is infinite. We didn't leave any cash in the deal, but the return on equity, the profit that we've actually generated. So if we sold this asset, that profit that would come out is actually 2.67% per annum. So you could argue that inflation is crushing that value of that asset, and the cash flow isn't, actually setting the world alight. It's kind of, we can turn a blind eye to that because it doesn't owe us any capital. We've created that value in there. And yes, it is a poor return on something we've created, but what we've created, we didn't have the year before. So even though it's a poor return, we're happy to keep that site. We think because it's in a good location, the capital appreciation will help that return on equity, because that's obviously purely finitely looking at a cash flow, return on cash perspective from cash flow. Once you add capital appreciation out, which is a bit subjective, hopefully that is more positive. But that deal's done and boxed off and refinanced on a 5-year fix, and that is now generating net income into our business. Now let's look at the little Long Hanborough deal, which across the board of our sites is definitely our smallest. In some considerations, a tenth of the size of our other sites. It doesn't take as long. It's lower risk. It's a little bit more focused around the cash flow, and the project should be a lot shorter to deliver. But the plan is with Long Hanborough is we should return just under £50,000 net after all costs, finance, mortgage, running costs, agency fees to manage the site, literally everything, which is huge. Because the development side of things isn't as profitable, we leave in a bit of capital in the deal. We'll share what that looks like at the end of this show. But because we leave deal in, the ROI is way inferior to the St Helens Mill project. It's actually 46% return on the cash that we've put in the project that gets locked in. But the really important figure to think about is £50,000 worth of net income into the business every year indefinitely. And also this last metric is the equity that we've accumulated in the project will be creating a 17.7% return on that capital. So it's kind of like big, lumpy, gorgeous, profitable development doesn't cash flow that well against slightly smaller, slightly uglier, less sort of ego-driven, but huge cash cow project. And that is the Long Hanborough side. So it's considering 2 completely different models of business and how we can make Long Hanborough work. If we knock down Long Hanborough and develop a new site, yes, it will look beautiful, but we always lead on cash, on the numbers. And that's what our investors have loved about all of our projects. We're numbers driven, beauty comes after that, unfortunately, and it's all about creating the value that we're creating for the net cash flow in this business. So evidently, the way that we look at that, that's 50,000. That might pay for our offices every year indefinitely, and it's using that asset as a vehicle to spin capital back into our business. And it's been mine and Ben's aim to build the portfolio so that one day our net income, without doing any development, covers our business overheads alone.
Nice one. Cool. So that's all of the sort of financial spreadsheet type of stuff. I'm going to talk through the planning process and the more sort of detailed design phase of that, which is sort of my bag. Design and development is my part of the business. Land and acquisitions is Jack. So what have we done here? We've taken a phased approach to this, and Jack mentioned earlier about making sure that we had both a bridging option and a development finance option with the funding, because we weren't guaranteed to get planning approval in time to do the straight development finance route. And if we hadn't had the planning approval in place, we would have had to bridge it to then wait for that planning approval to come through. Luckily, the planning did come through in good time, and that planning was a Class MA application, and I'm going to be talking through a little bit more in detail what that is. We've then taken, and that Class MA was for 12 bed HMO, effectively across four bedrooms. Four flats. The second phase of our planning phase was to add some dormers and some other external works. And now our latest application is to basically consolidate everything that we want to do into one planning application to get 5 flats, which will convert into 14-bed HMO. So a little bit more detail around those stages. Stage 1 was that prior approval permitted development phase. So prior approval is a form of permitted development, and this project was the classic Class E to C3 residential use change of use. And that's the sort of thing that you'll see a lot of people touting on social media, and a lot of education platforms will be talking about how to convert commercial to residential. And it's these types of assets that people are going to be doing this on, because it is a 56-day process. As long as you satisfy things like daylight, sunlight, transport, noise assessments and contamination, then you are all good. And as long as you tick the boxes, then there's no reason why they should refuse the permitted development to convert it. So yeah, part of this process was basically to establish the change of use. So changing from what we see on the right hand side to which is the layout of the doctor's surgery with all the little sort of offices and the surgery rooms and the back end kind of storage areas, to what we've got on this left hand side, which is our ground floor plan, effectively showing for 3 flats on this ground floor. So what you can't do under Class MA, you are restricted from going from C3 use to C4. So if you're going to a HMO, which is C4 use up to 6 persons, you can't actually do that if you've gone down the Class MA route. So at this point, we've just established the change of use, made sure that we've got everything that we need to get the development funding in place, and we can now start the works. One of the key things about Class MA applications is that there are no external changes allowed under the straight Class MA route. But if you've been tuning into a lot of our other lives and videos, you'll know that we often use a little bit of a hack where we use what's called a Grampian condition and an external works full planning application to link an external works package getting windows and roof lights and extra light into spaces that are dead on the floor plate to with a Class MA application to then sort of supercharge that Class MA and make the most out of the floor plans. So this is February 2024. We got the prior approval application approved within 56 days. That's the Class E to C3 use change of use. That's established. That's great. We've got our development finance in place, and we can start works moving forward. Now, what we want to do, and what we do on most of our sites, is try to optimize the schemes as much as we possibly can. So we've secured what we need for the development funding. We've secured the change of use, which takes our £114 a square foot purchase up to whatever it may be when you work it back on a residual value. But ultimately, with that planning application in hand, we've already added value to the asset. So the second phase of the planning was to add an external works package, and that external works is as the doctor's surgery as it currently stands. So no change of use, no residential use. It's purely, look, we're now putting in an application in because we've got a doctor's surgery here and we want to add more space to that doctor's surgery. We want to add these 2 new dormers either side of this main dormer on the existing front elevation. We want to change around lots of windows, making way for our further applications internally. So if you've got a dead space where the only way of turning it into a habitable income generating bedroom is by getting light into it, well then as part of this external works planning phase, we will be adding a window in that location, making way for that future change of use. We've added bins and bike stores again. So when we look at our later phase planning, we know that we're going to need bins and bikes. So we're now making allowances for that with our external works stage 2 planning package. So stage 3 went through various options of sort of creative structures to make this happen. What we sort of realized and what our planning consultant suggested was that we should just now put in a full planning application to regularize all of the changes that we're doing. So basically taking the fallback position of the Class MA that we've had approved, taking the fallback position of the external works that have already been agreed and approved, which they were, and then effectively changing that internal space to optimize the layouts. And in this occasion, we got 5 flats in there within the same space. And what we can now do with a full planning application is convert those flats from C3 use to C4 HMOs, which, like I said earlier, under Class MA, you can't do that. It's a restriction on the Class MA permitted development that you can't use C3 to C4 permitted development rights. Whereas under this full planning application, we can. So we're going to be getting 5 flats and converting the space into a 14-bed HMO, basically. So it's cluster flats, I guess, is the best way of describing it. So 5 flats where you've got 2 to 3 bedroom HMOs in each flat. Cool. So that was the planning phase. We're currently waiting on that full planning application. It's due in 2 weeks' time. So hopefully in 2 weeks' time, if you're tuning into our live, we'll be celebrating the fact that we've got that final planning approval in place. But we're pretty confident with the fallback positions of the other 2 that it's not really too much of a step change from what's already been agreed. It's more an internal shift in terms of how we're rearranging the internal space. So onto the build process and more detailed design stuff. And this is more sort of top tips for converting commercial properties into residential space. And this is the types of things you'll be working with your architect, with your engineer, with your MEP engineers to squeeze as much value out of the conversion as possible and things to look out for. So top tips from me, having done a number of these over the last couple of years, both understanding them from an architectural perspective and also a developer perspective. So first one is your fire strategy. Since Grenfell, building control are super hot and your warranty providers will be super hot on your fire strategy. So we would always get a fire consultant in from day one to understand the implications of any things that we have to put in. And those sorts of things might be automatic opening vents like we've got shown on the center of the screen. Your fire consultant will talk you through all of your compartmentation. So these red dotted lines are 60-minute fire resistance in the protected escape ways. And then we've got 30-minute fire compartments where you enter into the lobbies of each flat, basically. Acoustic separation is another massive thing that you're going to want to understand, because changing and rectifying any issues that you find afterwards when a flat is complete and it fails a noise test are massive. You're ripping things up, you're installing new finishes, you're repainting, you're replastering. It's a nightmare. So you have to make sure that your separation details are accurate, and that means you're separating floors, you're separating walls. So basically at the end of every project, an acoustic test needs to happen. And what happens with that is you have a microphone in one room in one flat, and then the wall opposite in an opposing flat has a loudspeaker effectively, and they're playing various different noises at various different frequencies, and the microphone will pick up on those noises. And if those noises are above a certain decibel rating, then you're going to fail your test, which means that the separating layer in the wall isn't good enough to resist the amount of acoustic noise, transferring between them. So you have to make sure that your party wall details are sufficient to block the noise transfer. And one of the things I've seen fail the most in the past is floors, separating floors between flats above and below. And a lot of that is to do with flanking noise. So making sure that it's not necessarily just the floor detail itself, but it's the workmanship that goes into actually stopping noise transferring down between floor and wall, for example. That's a really weak point. So noise will basically find the weakest point within the space. So you have to make sure that everything is really detailed really well and the workmanship is really good on site. So that's the sort of thing that you could bring in a separate acoustic engineer to do, but typically your architect is going to use relatively standard build-ups and standard details that have already been tested in isolation to give you the decibel reduction between floors or walls. Structure, I'm not going to spend too much on this. I just wanted to highlight some of the key things that we've done within the doctor surgery project to save us money. And that's what you want a good structural engineer to do. And you want to push back on them as much as you possibly can. But I've circled here in the images some areas in yellow where, in an ideal world, in terms of the internal space, and your architect is probably going to want to remove some of this structure. Whereas, and that's great, and that's what the architect's there to do, is meant to make great spaces for you and make it flow as best as it can be, but that costs money. So fundamentally, sometimes you're going to have to push back on your architect and say, look, removing this structure here and here is going to cost us a shitload of money, when actually the gain is negligible and not really worth doing. So what we've said is that we'll keep these structural nibs in, because the red lines that I've shown here are structural steel beams that run across at high level. If we remove these nibs, we're going to have to replace all of those steel beams, extend them, potentially do some foundation works underneath to support the new beams, and it's just too much work. So with the structure, always look out when you're doing conversions for ways in which you can retain as much of the structure as you possibly can, because that structure and removing it is going to cost you a shitload of money. So drainage is another key thing. You want to try and be tapping into as much of the existing drainage as you possibly can, because as soon as you start installing new drainage works, you're looking at below ground drainage, you're looking at digging up ground slabs, installing new waterproofing, new drainage. So where you've got existing soil stacks, which is this thing that I'm pointing out on the right hand side, try to tap into those as much as you possibly can by designing your bathrooms around that. One thing that I've also shown these pictures on screen for is that we will try to get in and strip out the property as fast as we possibly can. As soon as we've got the keys, hopefully we're getting someone in next week and actually stripping out the property, so you can start to see all of the structure, you can start to see where all of the soil pipes go and all the drainage, and it really helps your design team make quick decisions because they're not assuming things. Now, when you make assumptions during the detailed design phase, it's not until you get on site and you start seeing that the design doesn't work, and then you have to rectify loads of issues or solve problems on site, which costs you 4 times as much as it would as getting it right on the paper at the start of the project. So make sure you're stripping out as soon as possible and utilizing drainage runs where you can. Utilities I've labeled, but I'm not going to go into detail on this, because actually last week in season 2, episode 34, I did a bit of a deep dive into the utilities and how you should be getting things done a lot faster and as quickly as possible, and some top tips on how you can do that and things to look out for. So tune into last week's episode if you want to understand a bit more about utilities for developments. Space efficiency is a massive one for me, having worked for the Berkeley Group and really sort of drill into me how much time you should be spending on optimizing floor plans and the development mix and lots of other things that I'm going to talk about. There's huge amounts of value that can be gained from just concentrating on making your plans as efficient as they possibly can be. Types of things you should be looking out for are the GIA to NIA ratio, and that is the gross internal area versus the net internal area, or your net saleable area. The fewer and this is my second point actually, reducing stair cores and hallways that are making you no money. You're not selling stairways and stair cores and hallways, you're selling flats. So all of your communal stair cords, your communal hallways, you want to reduce those as much as possible. And I will always aim for a GIA to NIA ratio of around about 85%, as a minimum. The other thing you can look at, and we've done this successfully on numerous projects, is looking at the development mix. So are you better off having one large 3-bed or a 2-bed and a 1-bed? Most of the time, you're probably going to want to do a 1-bed and a 2-bed instead. So it's looking at that development mix. Sometimes the planning officers will push you down a certain route, and in their local policy, they'll have a development mix that they want you to stick to. So it might be that 25% of your development needs to be 3 beds. They might have a bigger they might have a local need where they're more interested in 1 beds than they are in 2 beds, and therefore you'll have to look at a mix in which you've got more 1 beds than 2 beds. So development mix is crucial to adding value. And then standardizing wet rooms as much as possible. Most of the en-suites and bathrooms that we install in our schemes have a standard size. I know that a 1700 by 2200 millimeter bathroom, for example, is a really good size and a standardized arrangement that we can use going through all of our developments. Likewise, with a shower room, it might be that a 1400 long by a 1400 wide by 2200 long ensuite is a very good size for an ensuite when entering from the long edge. And we've got a set sort of 4 or 5 different arrangements of bathrooms and wet rooms that I like to use in all of our developments. The same goes for regularization. The more you can regularize your kitchens and have the same kitchen in different units, the cheaper it's going to be, and the more easy it is for your guys on site to install, because they're going to just be repeating the same thing that they did previously in the previous kitchen. Quite difficult, if I'm honest, on these types of conversions where the sites are a lot more quirky and you're trying to optimize the space and have other constraints that you have to deal with. But even having that in mind, that the more you can regularize from a kitchen perspective, the cheaper it's going to be for you, is a great start. Cool. And that's it really from the sort of design and the build perspective. I know it's quite technical, and there'll be some people that absolutely sort of switch off, but let me know if you've got any questions down below.
But I think there'll be probably quite a lot of people that love that bit the most. So horses for courses, shall we say.
That's it.
But no, super interesting. I think that Grampian condition, like chess game that we play in the planning process, pretty much on all of our developments, whether it's a 1 million gross development value or a 10 million gross development value, is a really key way to create value down an easier route than battling with planning, which has been a big problem for everyone over the last sort of five, 10, maybe even longer years. So long-term strategy, I sort of alluded to this at the beginning. When you're a development company, you're only as good as your last deal, and every development you do, you've got to find, fund, deliver, and sell it successfully. And there's a lot of risk that's encapsulated into that whole process. It's very, very difficult to be a developer. You shut your eyes for a second and the ship starts going in the wrong way. So you have to really be on the case with developments, and you really have to be you have to breathe success and put processes in place so you can continuously deliver successful projects. The long-term strategy for this project is to keep it within our portfolio. The benefit of keeping something in your portfolio, if it has a high cash return, is you don't have to keep doing the development risk part. It's sat there. It's evergreen capital income. Central Suites will be managing this. So technically for XP, it will be very, very passive. There'll be very little work that will be required once this building is finished. A lot of the management around even the maintenance, the management, the asset will be taken care of by the management company, certainly for small things. And because it's a back to brick, very intrusive conversion, we'd like to think that there'll be very little work that is required to maintain and keep the asset. So keeping it in the portfolio for more passive income than having to go take risk, find sites, develop sites, fund sites, and pose all of those problems. So it's a really good return on time, and time is a really important thing in property world, and should certainly not be discounted by any capacity. So if you look at this spreadsheet, if you can see us, so with the development value at 1.14, one thing I did really want to point out that is really important is because this is cluster flats and it's high cash flowing, lenders can go up to 75% loan to value. You'd probably find in higher value areas, you're going to be limited to the stress test of the rental coverage on that mortgage. So that's one thing. Leverage is good on the cash flow. We release a good chunk of capital, about £170,000, which goes straight to the investor. That means XP have to find about £100,000 plus their interest to keep the site within our portfolio. So technically, other than our time, what this costs us is the cash that goes in on the refinance process. We stress test the remortgage values. So we've currently got in there 5.5%, 6.5% mortgage. I'd have probably said that they're very, very conservative. We refinanced the mill, which is the deal that we shared earlier, I think at just over 5%. And obviously interest rates are moving in the right direction. We never sort of leave that open. We like to look at the different scenarios to hopefully generate that £50,000 net income to facilitate our business, our overheads. Obviously, development is a very, very lumpy game. Some months you may be funding the start of a project or an exchange or the soft costs to go into a deal. The next month you might be exiting a project. So it's big swings of cash, which we're trying to plateau out and build in a more stable income into our development company to de-risk it. So that's the long-term strategy. I'm sure there will maybe some more questions. I've seen some really interesting questions come in to date. Should we rattle on through?
Yeah, I was gonna ping on to those. So Anshul, thanks for your question. Instead of cluster flats, if you went for a high density scheme of studio stroke one beds, what would the GDV and net rent be? I'm trying to understand why you went for cluster flats versus studio stroke one bed. So from a density perspective, what we've done with the 14-bed HMO is hugely more dense than studio stroke one beds. A studio minimum size of a studio is 37 square meters from a planning perspective. A proper one bed is actually 50 square meters. So when we, and if we did that and we are only getting, I don't know what one bed flat would be in the area, maybe £1,200 rent a month, 1,100 quid.
11 really, yeah.
Yeah, whereas we're probably going to be getting £750 per room from a HMO perspective. So if we've got let's say a 60 square meter flat that we can actually get 3-bed HMO out of, we are getting £2,250 a month, as opposed to £1,100 to £1,400 a month. So actually doing the cluster HMO model is, from a yield perspective, hugely more profitable than installing studios and one beds.
Yeah, completely agree. I was actually quickly running some maths to just say, for argument's sake, let's say we've got 5 cluster flats, but let's just assume we managed to get 8 studios in. That would be, so just some quick maths model that I've run. So I've basically run the gross income as a HMO, which is 775 per bed per month times 14 bedrooms, is £130,000 a year gross. If you divide that by the size of the building, let's call it 3,000 square foot for ease, that's £43 per square foot per year in gross rent. If you then do 8 studio flats times 1,100 times 12, because obviously it's an annualized, and then divided by that same 3,000 square feet, you get £35 per square foot. And the reason there's that discrepancy is because you've got 8 kitchens and living rooms and you haven't got 5 kitchens and living rooms. So your boost in revenue against that space that doesn't generate rent, which is bedrooms, your balance is out of kilter.
Yeah, very good. And I think it's probably worth also saying, from a planning perspective, if you're going down the full planning route, like I've said we're doing at this latest phase, you're not going to get the development mix that the local planning authority want with all one beds. The development mix, they will want some 2 beds in there. They might even want a 3-bed in there, for example, depending on what their development mix is in the local policy. So if you're doing it on a purely class MA, then yes, you could get 7 1-beds. But if you're doing it under full planning, then you have the development mix to think about as well. Hopefully that answers it. Cool. Another question from F. Would like to know who you are, F, if you want to add that underneath. I'm looking to do my first property flip, but I don't have capital. I'm looking to partner with an investor. Could you suggest how I should approach a deal to attract an investor with no track record? We must have answered this in the past. We're actually, just worth saying, we're trying to use AI to basically look at all of our videos that we've done, and there's probably 100 now, almost coming up 100, because we're almost at the end of the second year of doing this. Use AI to basically trawl them all and categorize the topics that we've talked about, so that if you go on our website, you can actually, if you want to understand more about investing or raising investment, there'll be a tag that you can click and it will say, okay, there's 5 episodes that we've spoken about this. Go to season 1, episode 32, and it'll be a database of kind of resource for people to use to hear about what we have to talk about on each topic. But Jack, you're probably best placed to go through this.
Yeah, so there's a multitude of things that you could say about this, but the top tips that I can share is do something that you can handle. If you're not in the property and construction game, make sure that you have the right team around you to deliver the right scheme and the right size of scheme. That's really, really important. Capital raising is kind of a permanent task that you have to do in your business. You always have to be communicating with potential capital partners, and that can start with friends and family, go up to more institutional, or sit in between with ultra high net worths and high net worths. And that is the natural way. The way that we did our first project is someone letting us £50,000 because they liked what we're doing, they believed in our style. We put in some what is sometimes called hurt money ourselves, or skin in the game, and we're the first loss. And start small and grow from there. So once you borrow £50,000, next deal maybe 100, next deal maybe 200, next deal maybe 400, and that is the linear curve. Our average investment to date every year has gone up and up and up and up and up. We haven't started one year and borrowed £50,000 and the next year borrowed $1 million. It's been a very slow linear curve over the sort of 6 or 7 years that we've been growing. And then the only other thing I would say is, even though capital raising is a permanent fixture, I've always been a strong, firm believer. The two hardest things to find in a property development world is the deal and the money. The only thing to mention is always be thinking about the capital raising perspective, because that's kind of like your ongoing marketing engagement plan. But a good deal does attract money. If I got brought a deal by someone that's not done a development before ever, and I can see that they've put a lot of research and work into a project, and it is really profitable, I'm going to be more inclined to invest in that deal than someone that's very seasoned with a low margin deal. So the deal often does bring the money, because that's obviously the eventuality. If you then are the person that's delivering it, that's technically the risk. So then you can put measures in from an investment's perspective to make sure your risk is negated, i.e. bringing in a project management firm that can see the scheme end to end, or bringing in another more senior developer to also have a slice of the pie, and making sure the borrower is putting some capital into the deal as well. So hopefully those tips help.
Nice. Anshul, thanks for asking the second question. Thanks for explaining, and I understand that the rent will be higher. What would the difference be in the GDV? I haven't run the figures. It's going to depend on what model you're going for and what you're looking to do. Like our whole goal with this is that it goes into our portfolio with, and it's more about rental than it is for the actual value of the asset. But I can't imagine it's that different.
Yeah, it's not. So in the sort of areas that we operate, it's because you're working predominantly on a pound per square foot value. The values don't swing too much. There was a day where studio flats were worth a huge fortune on a pound per square foot value against anything else. Completely agree with that, and there is a difference. However, you're losing communals, hallways, and some efficiency with the floor plans. I believe that a studio or a one bed in that area wouldn't probably be much more than sort of 170. So when you actually break it down on a pound per square foot value, the extra fixtures and fittings, kitchens, bathrooms, it kind of means you're doing more work for similar actual percentage value.
Yeah, if you had sort of fully like studio 37 square meter studios, and you could manage to get maybe 7 out of the space, which should just about fit, depending on kind of layout, and that's something else that's crucial to look at. But you're looking at sort of just shy of 1.2 million GDV. But like Jack says, you've then got more kitchens. You're going to have more wasted space with your communals and access ways and things like that. So I actually think it's going to all depend on what your business model is. But in this situation, I think the GDV of having 7 1-beds as opposed to a 14-bed HMO over 5 flats is probably going to be slightly similar.
Yeah, I also think since COVID, studios and 1-beds are less popular. I've known a lot of developers with big sites that they used to absolutely fly off the shelf with Help to Buy and pre-COVID. Now I know people delivering 60, 70 flats that they're just not selling the way they were. So sort of negating a bit of that risk as well.
Nice, cool. I hope you enjoyed that. That would be Yeah, it's been a deep dive. We do these every now and again on some of the projects that we're working on. If you've enjoyed it, please do rate us on Spotify, review us on Apple Podcasts. And if you could just do us a favor and share this with one person you think is in the property game, is in the business and entrepreneurship game, and would gain value from this, we would be very much appreciative. So yeah, have a great Saturday, and speak to you all soon.